This is a actually two screen captures, if you will. One is of music available online. The other one is music available in a brick and mortar store. So if we were talking about, whether it be music on Spotify or Tidal or Amazon, even buying physical product online, or the artist's website, or on the bottom photo, that is actually a picture at the iconic record store Amoeba Records in San Francisco. And if you were in these places, you would find, whether it be the physical place or the digital place, you would find that every single week without fail, there are releases, brand new releases. As a matter of fact, Jay just gave us a little tidbit on one, Little Dirk's new album, that are released, and there are plenty of releases that go on to succeed, and there are plenty of releases that go on to fail, to be miserable failures. So if we're, and the reason I'm showing you a retail store is because typically, I think these days there's kind of a blurred line between what a professional release is, because obviously somebody could really have no true business plan, no business strategy, no marketing concepts in place, no sales or no goals for revenue, and upload music to Audio Mac, upload music to SoundCloud, upload music to Bandcamp, and that's it. That's the extent of their marketing and distribution. Strategy is literally just make it available. And I want to make sure that we're differentiating from that type of release. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but in this context, we're talking about professionally making something available. And one thing that you're going to find as you move on to your next assignment or your last assignment is that you all are going to have a marketing budget, and that marketing budget is going to give you a ceiling of $100,000 to do all kinds of marketing things. That doesn't mean, by the way, that you have to spend $100,000. You have to gauge it based on your sales goals. Does it make sense to spend however much you're going to spend based on the goals that you have? But for the purposes of this discussion, I just want to make sure that I differentiate a release that is literally just a haphazard. You throw it up there, and that's it. That's the extent of it. And a release that is actually, planned and strategized and has a lot of effort, time, and goals behind it. So every single week, there are releases like the latter, serious releases from serious entities that are made available, and there are plenty that go on to fail, and there are even more that there are even more that go on to fail, and some that obviously succeed. So my question to you folks is, if you could tell me what are some of the elements that cause a product to fail versus go on and to succeed. And before you share, nobody releases something with the intent to fail. I mean, obviously that happens a lot, but nobody's putting something out to fail. So open your mics and you let me know, why do releases fail?
I think right now sometimes releases can fail because of oversaturation and just so many people releasing the same sounding things all at once. Especially because it even happens like it's supposed, like it happens like they plan it out. Like different genres, like they'll all release around like this time, or like they'll all go on tour during this time. So it's like, yeah, people will be buying some people's tickets, but then there's going to be all those other people who didn't get the first glimpse of something, so they're not going to look any farther into it.
That's a great point. Competition is immense. I mean, there's a lot of product out there, but again, even if we're talking about proper releases that are being released with marketing dollars and strategies, competition is immense. So that's certainly a valid point. So what else? Why would a release fail versus another one succeeding? And that happens every single week. Every Friday is release day, and you have product that succeeds and products that fail. So tell me about some of the reasons that product fails.
I think it could maybe also be possibly even lack of promotion for maybe if an artist believes that they can just put out an album and surprise everybody, but they may not have necessarily that platform or that power to do so. So they kind of take the chance and they just throw the album out there, and then nobody was really looking for it, and it kind of just passed by everybody.
That's a great point. I remember years ago when we saw one of the first of what would soon be many of these kind of like, out of the blue releases that come out without any proper promotion. And the one I'm thinking about was Beyonce. Beyonce had this release that she dropped, and it made a big splash because the idea was that she was releasing this record without promotion. And that inspired, it was almost inevitable that it was going to inspire a lot of folks to say, well, that's the way to do things. Just surprise people, catch them off guard, release something. And that in and of itself is, promotions. The biggest dilemma with that is that number one, we're talking about one of the most famous artists on the planet, right? Number two, yeah, maybe she didn't have any official promotion for that release before it dropped. However, because of her name, because of her brand, because she's on TV all the time, because of the fact that she's a significant presence on social media, et cetera, she was actively promoting herself year round. So that was another piece of the equation. The other part of it was, at the time, the biggest place to consume music was iTunes. iTunes was the biggest quote unquote record store on the planet. And at the time of that release, the Beyonce record owned the front page of iTunes. Talk about the most expensive piece of real estate in music, the homepage of the biggest and baddest at the time retail platform on the planet. Bigger than physical retail, bigger than anything else that was available. iTunes was the top. So even in that instance, even though it was a quote unquote surprise to her fans, there was still plenty of marketing. So yes, I concur with what you said. Marketing is, or promotions is obviously a big deal. Now, that being said, as you guys all know, promotions is a big umbrella. It's not just one thing. So, if we dissect that a little bit, what are some of the things within promotions that maybe were done well or poorly that led to where we are in our scenario that releases find themselves every single week where they fail? So what are some of the other things maybe that are being done wrong or not being done at all that could lead to that unfortunate result?
Maybe possibly like a merch item or something that's connected with the product that they're selling.
Okay.
Like, I don't know, like maybe like clothing, like a design that maybe doesn't best represent the product, or maybe could be insensitive to the customers that could be buying it.
Yeah, I mean, I would concur with that. I think that if it's something that's off-putting, if it's something that potentially is offensive, if it's something that just does not resonate with the audience, that can certainly play a role. I mean, if you think for a moment, someone like a Dr. Dre, let's say Dr. Dre releases an album during the height of Beats by Dre. I mean, think about that for a moment. Like, that in and of itself is probably the best possible promotion that you could have, is that you have this person that is literally on the ears of millions and millions of music fans. And now he has his own brand new project. That is kind of like, a perfect storm for promotion. So I would certainly agree that the product, the physical product or physical merchandise can certainly be helpful, or potentially it could be a detriment, depending on whether or not there's something there that's resonating with the audience, or maybe in some cases alienating the audience. What else? If we're talking about promotions, what else?
Well, I think publicity has a lot to do with that, like your public image. If you do something that's not cohesive with what you're doing.
Yeah.
So I remember this was like 10 or 12 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
There's this Venezuelan singer, and he released a song that was called, well, it can be translated to, I'm going to stay in Venezuela because I'm optimistic.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2 months after he released the song, he migrated to Spain and he left the country. So the song really didn't have like any sales.
Mm-hmm.
It was just like everybody was just criticizing him, and like he's pretty much canceled in my country because of what he did.
That's a great point. I mean, if you think about the this environment of quote unquote cancel culture, that is significant, and that's something that could pretty much ruin someone's career, at the snap of a finger. I think about an artist, comparable to what you described, somebody that was maybe riding high, and then one thing kind of changed that trajectory. And that is, I don't know if you guys remember Robin Thicke. You guys remember Robin Thicke? Robin Thicke was like killing it. He owned radio. He was on the top of the charts. And then sure enough, the public took a dislike, or maybe his fans took a dislike to some of the things that were out there about him and his relationship. And then his next album dropped, which was named after his wife at the time. And it failed miserably. Like, he literally went from this chart-topping record to Blurred Lines to having, and just to kind of, share some numbers. The record, the Blurred Lines, was a mega hit. And the subsequent album in the UK was, I believe, 800 units. Think about that for a moment. We're talking about a major pop artist who dominated radio, who dominated the charts, whose next album in a country like England went on to sell only 800,000, 800 units. 800 units. In Canada, I believe it was 500 units. I don't remember what it was in America, but it wasn't impressive. Like, literally, he went from, the top to like having this significant fall from grace. And it was about PR. It was about his public image and supposed infidelity, and the fact that his audience wasn't feeling that. Think about performances, right? Is the artist currently touring? Are they in front of an audience on a regular basis? Are they making television appearances? What about radio? I mean, radio is obviously not for everyone because it's not something that everyone could attain. However, even though we're in this streaming era, I guarantee you, if you had an opportunity to either get a shot at radio or pass on it, I would imagine if you have the wherewithal, you would go for getting some radio play. So radio is still quite important, and not everybody could get it, right? What about potentially, what about social media? What about traction on social media? I mean, we've seen countless artists literally, in some cases, come out of obscurity because something happened. I mean, Lil Nas X, is there a better example than Lil Nas X and his explosion onto the scene with TikTok, right? So, I mean, that certainly is an important factor in success. And guess what? That's under the umbrella of marketing and promotions, right? What else?
Maybe not being genuine with the product that you might be releasing, or there might be some fraudulence behind it, where it's not something that actually, I guess, if it's an artist, maybe it's not a product that they're releasing that actually connected with them, or that maybe they wrote, or things like that.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's important, and there's certainly been examples throughout history of an artist's authenticity being brought into question, and clearly, conversely, someone's authenticity helping them, further connect with an audience. I mean, I think probably, as far as authenticity goes, probably the biggest example of that, and this goes way back, but this is one for the history books, is going to be, many, many years ago. And I'm sure some of you are, even though it was a while ago, still familiar with the Milli Vanilli story. How many people are familiar with Milli Vanilli?
I am.
No? Oh, yeah. So Milli Vanilli, for those that don't know, was a pop duo that literally were the darlings of pop culture. They were on all the award shows. They had put out a record. They won a Grammy. They were killing it. And sure enough, it was revealed that they weren't singing their hits. It was kind of like pop dance music. And there was somebody in the camp that had revealed that they actually weren't the ones that sang those songs. And even though everybody knows that, when you see a live performance on TV, it's lip synced, right? 9 times out of 10, they're lip syncing. But in this case, they were lip syncing, but they weren't even lip syncing their own voices, because it was actually somebody else who had sang the song. So that was probably, I mean, to my recollection, the biggest example of, the lack of integrity or genuineness detracting somebody from a trajectory that, at that point was probably the biggest success that you would ever have. Not to mention, things related to improprieties. I mean, there's plenty of examples. We saw that probably most recently with R. Kelly, even though it took a while, but, there was obviously a serious backlash with R. Kelly and all his inappropriate, alleged inappropriate activities. And, even something political. I don't know if you guys know about the Dixie Chicks, but when the Dixie Chicks fell from grace because they kind of came at opposing views politically from, at the time, commercial country radio. And because of their political stance, they basically were shunned by radio that once embraced them. So there's plenty of things that could go wrong there as well. And in that case, going back to authenticity, they were being authentic. However, they, as far as their audience, or at least the audience at the time, they felt that that was against the, I guess, the belief systems of patriotism that a lot of folks have, or the perception they have in the country music space, and they kind of seem to violate that, even though they were standing up for what they believed in. At the time, they were basically protesting the then President Bush over the war in Iraq. So, that's something that we saw as well. They definitely fell from grace for doing what they believed in. So it was kind of interesting. Anything else? Success versus failure. What is someone doing right versus someone else doing wrong? Let me ask you a question. What about paid advertising? Tell me a little bit about that. Where's that fit in today's equation when it comes to marketing?
The social network service.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
Social network service. You mean? I mean,
social
like the
network?
influencers.
Social network, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Of course. There's plenty. I mean, how many times have you been online, whether it be on your phone on Instagram or it be on YouTube, and something that you were not looking for pops up? And in some cases, that something is an artist, right? An artist release or music. 9 times out of 10, that is marketing in some capacity. In some cases, it's paid advertising. In other cases, it's some type of promotion that led for that to be shown to you, and you didn't call it up, but it's there. Pandora, Spotify, all those places are opportunities to put music in front of people, and in some cases, you never asked for that music, right? So paid promotions is still a thing. It's not necessarily in the same way maybe that it was a while ago, which might have just been, television advertising, radio advertising, print advertising. However, advertising, you better believe, is still a thing and an important thing. As a matter of fact, I would say it's more important than ever, simply because you're able to target your audience better than ever, right? Once upon a time, if I put an ad on a popular TV show at 8 o'clock, I'm going to reach a lot of people, but I'm also going to reach a lot of people that could care less about my product. Today, I could literally put my product in front of people that are looking at things that are 100% in line with my target market. So advertising is still important. What else? I'm going to give you a hint. What about on the first day of class? What did we talk about? I'll give you a second hint. Everybody did a project on it.
What is called?
The album art?
Yes, album art. Think about that for a moment. I mean, is there anyone here that doesn't think that album art is potentially responsible for a lot of if it's done right, for a lot of attention, or if it's done wrong, maybe won't do anything at all for you, right? We talked a lot about that, right? Not to mention, we talked about the fact that in some cases, it's not only as important as the music. In some cases, especially with something that they're able to merchandise, it's maybe even more important than the music. So clearly, album art is another important aspect when it comes to what you could do right, what could you do wrong, and that leading to success or failure. If we're talking about a physical product, which by the way, everyone in this class is developing a product that's going to be made available physically, things like manufacturing are important. That's something that we've seen in recent years with a medium that has been quite popular and has had a significant resurgence. What is that medium? I'll give you a hint. I talked about this a little bit when we spoke with the founder of the bakery a couple of weeks ago. He was a gentleman that ran the mastering plant in LA, right? So Vinyl Records is a perfect example of that. Vinyl Records, as you guys all know, has had this amazing resurgence, and there has been a significant problem with Vinyl Records. And that problem is that everybody wants to make them, but the facilities can't keep up with those demands. If you can't make your record available because it's not coming off the plant, that's a problem. Materials. If you want something, think about today, and this is maybe a little bit different because it's not necessarily music related, but it certainly could happen in music as well. If you don't have the materials that you need for your product, then your manufacturing is going to come to a halt. Today, if you watch the news, all you hear about is that basic things like swabs for those COVID-19 tests aren't readily available, right? If anyone here has tried to order things like hand sanitizer, it hasn't been available. If you try to order gloves, there's a long waiting list. People went to the store. They couldn't buy basic things like, tissue paper. So materials are significant when it comes time to manufacture a product. If you want a material and that material is not readily available, or maybe you have to go to a different supplier And I'll give you an example here. We had a record that we made right around or right after 9/11. And the record was literally held at customs. Like the master record that was going to the manufacturing plant in Canada that were pressing the CDs. It was literally held for weeks. Don't ask me why. It was out of my control. It was out of anyone's control that I knew. It was held in red tape in customs, and the manufacturing plant couldn't make the product because they didn't have the master, you know? And back then there was a physical master. So, you know, that's a perfect example of that. If you don't have the material, then clearly that's going to be problematic. What about inventory? How does that fit into the equation of what we're discussing? What's inventory?
Like the amount of product you have.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed. Anybody here ever make, I don't know, t-shirts or something else? Yeah. So, you know, if you make, let's just say hypothetically, you order, I don't know, 25 t-shirts. And now think about this for a moment. Now, when you order 25 shirts, you have to make some decisions. Some of those decisions include, well, what size do I want to buy? And what amounts of those sizes am I going to buy? So for example, maybe I know that I don't know if I'm going to do extra small. Maybe I'm going to do small, medium, large, and XL. But how many smalls? How many mediums? How many larges? How many XLs? And what happens if I only make 2 smalls out of those 25? And now you have someone that's trying to order a small, and I've already sold out. I don't have that product in my inventory, so I'm not going to be able to fulfill it. So that's a significant concern when you're dealing with physical product. And this is not specific to music. This is specific to business. And that's what we're talking about clearly. Distribution. Talk to me a little bit about how distribution fits into this equation.
The way that it's being released and being put out there, and how it's, I guess, how it's made available to the people still.
Okay. Okay. So obviously, if we're talking about digital distribution, that's almost a no-brainer, right? Because digital distribution is pretty much, for lack of a better description, it's ubiquitous. So I sign up with a distributor to make my music available at Spotify, to make my music available on Tidal, make my music available on Apple Music, et cetera, et cetera. And literally, you know, at the flip of a switch, if you will, that product is available pretty much everywhere by almost any reputable distributor that I could deal with, that I could do business with. They all kind of operate the same way, and they all kind of do the same thing. But when we're talking about physical product, it's not that easy, because it's not like we have this product that is, you know, with a snap of a finger available everywhere at the same time. It physically has to be there. And by the way, it physically has to be in the right place, in the right quantities, at the right time. And if you think about this for a moment, I don't know about you guys, but I've been to stores to buy all kinds of things. I don't know if anyone here has ever gone to, I don't know, you go buy an iPhone when it's first released and maybe they sold out. If you're a fan of Record Store Day, one of the big deals is that they're limited edition releases. So they're not available in every single store, number one. Number two, they're not available in mass quantities in every store. So having the product in the right place at the right time in the right quantities is paramount. It's immensely important. What about fulfillment? What is fulfillment? What does that mean?
I guess either maybe the customer's feeling satisfied, or it could be going through with what you were offering.
All right, I like that.
Like maybe the things that you promised to the customer as you were delivering that product, and maybe it's not everything that you said it would be.
Excellent, excellent. So fulfillment means getting the product to wherever it is that you said you were going to get it. So for example, especially if we're talking about ordering product online, somebody has to fulfill that product. I mean, clearly it also works with traditional distribution as well, which means that there could be an outlet that orders product and for whatever reason, your distributor drops the ball and the product isn't where it needs to be when it needs to be there. At the same time, if you're working with a company that's fulfilling orders online, easily the same thing could happen. I mean, if you think now for a moment, one of the huge news stories, let's see, at this point, maybe 5-6 months ago was this fiasco with Pledge Music. Anybody know what happened with Pledge Music? What's Pledge Music?
What is it? Like a distributor?
Yeah, it's a crowdfunding platform. It was a pretty significant crowdfunding platform, like a Kickstarter. And what ended up happening was that all the fans that were paying for all these different campaigns weren't able, in a lot of cases, to get the products that they ordered. Why? Not because the artist did anything wrong, but because the artist never got the money. The company, and they've been around for a while, and they were a big player. The company had issues. I don't know if you want to say mismanagement of funds. Bottom line was that they were using the pledge money to run the company, to operate the company. And they literally did not have the money to pay the artists who had raised, everything from a few $100 to many tens of thousands of dollars. And if you're an artist and you're waiting on that $10,000 to make those, 10,000 CDs or whatever it is that you promised your audience, but you don't have the money, you got a problem. And that was a big deal. There were even some big artists that got caught up in that. And if you Google it, it was sometime last year that kind of played out, and it was pretty ugly because you had all these bands that, in some cases, I'm sure you have fans that understood, but in other cases, I'm sure that there were fans that felt burnt because maybe they funded this thing for, I don't know, $100, $150, maybe $50, and they didn't get what they, thought they were going to get, or they didn't get anything. So fulfillment is a big deal. And obviously financial control is money. Having money is clearly important. If you don't have money to run your operations, then a lot of things are going to be skipped over and clearly is going to result in potentially in failure. And that's what we're talking about. Why do some releases succeed and why some fail? So other things to keep in mind: outsourcing. You folks on a regular basis, I guarantee you, are going to be outsourcing all kinds of activities, projects, and work. You can't do it all yourself. You're not expected to do it all yourself. In some cases, even if you can do it all yourself, maybe you shouldn't do it all yourself. Let's go back to that first assignment, album art. For that assignment, I made you the art director, right? In the real world, if you were working for a project, let's just say hypothetically, you're working for a label and the label has $100,000 budget to roll out this product, this music release, that's your budget. What are the chances, even if you're good with Photoshop, even if you're good with Canva, even if you're good with Illustrator, what are the chances, let me see your hands, that you're actually going to go ahead and design the package and album art for that product? Let me see your hands. Nobody? Why not? Why not, Julio?
Well, I'm a perfectionist. Like sometimes that's a problem, and unless I know, like for real, that I'm like very, very good at it, I wouldn't do it.
I love that.
Because I know that this is a product that people are going to enjoy.
Yeah.
And for example, when it comes to like making my music, I play the guitar.
Yeah.
And I can play the guitar live.
Mhm.
But when it comes to recording the guitar, I
Mhm.
don't want to be the guitar player because I know there's someone that can do it better.
Excellent. Excellent. And I concur with that. I will tell you that I'm fairly proficient with Photoshop. I've been using Photoshop since the 90s. However, when it comes to designing something that I am going to put together that's going to be commercially released, I don't mean something I might put up on social media. If it's going to be commercially released, I'm not designing it. I might put together a mock-up to show the professional, what I'm looking for. And by the way, it's going to look professional. But if I want my product to be able to stand toe to toe with the biggest and the baddest, I'm going to have to hire now. Let me get this straight. I'm going to have to hire the best that I could afford. Not the best, because maybe I can't afford the best, but the best that I could afford. And that's something to keep in mind. That's something I guarantee you, folks, that I see people drop the ball on that. I know you see it too on a regular basis. I can't even begin to tell you the stories of things that people send me. Going back to our discussion, by the way, with the gentleman the gentleman from the bakery, Eric. That's a mastering plan, right? Like if you've been around recording, I know some of you have. If you've been around recording, you probably know that if you go to a studio, you might work with an engineer that is the tracking engineer, right? They're the ones that record the tracks. Depending on the project, you might work with an engineer that mixes the music, right? Sometimes they're the same person. However, I will tell you that for 99.9%, I'll speak for myself, 99.9% of projects that I've released commercially, they haven't been the person that's mastered it. Like that mastering engineer typically is someone that's all they do. All they do, kind of going back to what Julio said, all they do is mastering, which means that they're the best at that one particular job. And those are the people that I outsource that to. So my point is, even if you could do it yourself, even if you have people that could do it, sometimes you very well might outsource it to somebody that you don't even know, you've researched hopefully, that could do it as good as you feel it needs to be able to stand up there with your competition. And one of the things that I heard here mentioned about one of the reasons things fail is immense competition. So how do you circumvent immense competition? By making sure your product is the best possible product you could make. So that's one of the things I want to make sure that I come across is that you're going to outsource activities. One of the most obvious things would be art and design. I mean, you might be in a situation, maybe you are a professional graphic designer. In that case, if you feel comfortable that you're the best person, that's fine. But you also have to be realistic with yourself. Other things, as I just mentioned, recording, mastering, photography, manufacturing is an obvious one because most people have Photoshop on their computer, but most people don't have a manufacturing plant right at their disposal. So that's an obvious one. So my point is that on the business side, which is where you guys are. And by the way, as a side note, I hear back from grads, some of them were in that room today, on a regular basis about them doing what we're talking about here. And in some cases, people have told me before they even graduate, like, oh, I just got an internship. I just got a job with so-and-so. And those things that we talked about doing, like, I'm being told to do those things now. And I'm so glad that I was able to cover this and do assignments related to it while I was in class. So my point is that I'm not looking at you guys as designers. I'm not looking at you as recording, mixers, mastering, engineers, photographers, et cetera, et cetera. But I am looking at you as business professionals that will be outsourcing. You will be making decisions about who does those things. So I want to make sure that you're able to make the best possible decisions and not just say, well, I've done some of that. Maybe I'll do it. So one thing I want you to remember, That, and I'm going to give you a perfect example that I lived through just yesterday and the day before. And it's not the first time, and I'm sure you all could relate. So I bought a fridge from Lowe's. And when the fridge got here, it had a big dent on it in the front, right? Like you couldn't even act like you wanted to miss it. There was a big dent on it. So think about that for a moment. The people that I am feeling that I need to deal with are the people that I bought it from, right? If I bought the product from you and something's wrong with it, who am I going to go to? I'm going to you. In this case, who am I dealing with? I'm dealing with the delivery people. The delivery people don't want to hear from me. I didn't pay them. They were paid by Lowe's, right? So that's a perfect example of that. Sometimes we outsource something, but the job that that entity does, think about this for a moment, represents us more than it represents them. In other words, that delivery company very likely dented my refrigerator when they were taking it off the truck, while they were shoving it through the door, et cetera, et cetera. But who am I going to blame? I don't even know the name of the delivery company.
You're going to blame the company.
I'm blaming Lowe's. Yeah, they're the ones that I paid, put my credit card in on the computer for. So that's something to keep in mind. You guys are going to develop products, but the people that, and by the way, when I say products, it could be a digital product, but the people that you outsource to actually do some of the things we discussed and more, their work represents you more than it does them. Because when someone gets that product, if I go to the store, if I go to Park Ave CDs here in Orlando and I buy your record and your record is warped, am I going to say, man, that manufacturing plant in South Florida really dropped the ball when they made that vinyl and then shipped it in a unair conditioned truck through the South in the middle of the summer? Of course not. What am I going to say?
You're gonna blame the artist because that's whose product it is.
Yeah, I might blame the artist, I might blame the label, but I'm not blaming the manufacturing plant, right? So that's my point. A lot of the, and by the way, as a side note, like those are things that I've lived through. Like I literally have manufactured vinyl for years and had a big order of vinyl arrive warped because it was sent through unair conditioned ground delivery in the middle of the summer through the South. And it was a bad situation. And we could take out the physical. We could take out the physical. You hire somebody to do a website. I've been there too. Hire somebody to do a website, and now the website's functionality is off. You know, it looks beautiful on my computer, but when I look at it on my iPhone, it looks trashy. Or I have features that, you know, don't work. People are messaging me, but I never get the messages, right? So are they going to be mad at the web designer that I hire? Of course not. They're going to be mad at me, right? So again, that's something I want you to keep in mind. Mulan, you were going to mention something. Were you going to say something, Mulan? Oh, okay, I thought I saw your hand. All right. So something to keep in mind, and that's why it's so important to do research, choose wisely, find out, and this is part of what we're going to talk about today. It's important, you know, I think a lot of times it's easy on the business side to kind of use the excuse, I'm not, and I've done it too, don't get me wrong, I'm not the technical person. That's not my job. I'm not the technical person. The problem is, I'm the one that hired the technical person. So I don't have to be an expert at all these technical things, but I should at least know, think about this for a moment. How am I going to hire someone to do a job if I don't even understand what the job entails, right? So you got to at least know some of the basics. You want to make sure that you get samples. If I'm making something, if I'm designing a website, get samples. You know, I'll tell you right now, and I've been through this so many times, but the most recent time was just a few months ago. I was looking to hire a company for web design, and sure enough, they gave me a quote, and then once they gave me the quote, they did the first step. They had to do a mock-up, so they did the first step in the job, which was to do the mock-up. And after they did the mock-up looked beautiful. After they did the mock-up, then they changed their price. Now, when they changed their price, I told them, well, hold up a minute now. That's not the price you quoted me. And they admitted that I was right. They said, you're right. That's not the price we quoted you. We could still do it at that price, but you're not going to have this feature, or this feature, which, by the way, they promised me. So think about that for a moment. Like, if I would have hired that company, that product I was developing, which is what the consumer is going to consume, the experience on that website would not have been up to par. It would have been a subpar experience. And because I wanted to save money, you know, who would they be mad at? They would be mad at me. They wouldn't be mad at some web designer on the other side of the planet. And I had to make a decision. Am I going to go with the company that's offering me this price, or am I going to find someone else? Sure enough, I found somebody else. That's another thing you want to keep in mind, pricing. Let me tell you something. Pricing is the biggest pitfall there is, because most of us, including myself, are very sensitive to pricing. You only have a certain amount of budget, and you know, you don't have a limited funds. So what happens is you are tempted to go with someone that's offering you the cheapest price or the most affordable price. And then what happens when you go with that person or that company? You know, I think it's pretty obvious, right? I mean, you know, it doesn't mean that every time you get a good deal is going to be poor job. But I think we all know, right? You get what you pay for. So that's something else you want to keep in mind. And I've been there as well. Trust me, I've fallen into all these traps. My point in telling you this is that you really have to be aware and cognizant of the potential pitfalls. So, professional output. If we're talking about printing something professionally, we're talking about using four color separation, right? So you guys are familiar with CMYK, right? You guys have seen that before, right? So what is this about? I mean, I know that cyan is a blue, et cetera, but what does that mean? What is that, CMYK? What's that about?
So the four of them can create any color.
Excellent. Excellent. So we're talking about professionally outputting something, then we're looking at these four colors being used to simulate or make almost every color. I say almost because if I have something that I'm making or I'm printing, you know, most colors I could get by combining these four colors, but there's still some colors that no matter how much I combine these colors, I'm not going to get. So for example, metallics, you know, gold, chrome, right? I'm not going to be able to make CMYK and get silver. That's not going to happen. So in some instances, you might need a fifth or sixth color. So that's something to keep in mind. But when we're talking about professional output, we're looking at four color separation. So this is an example from Photoshop, just literally showing you, you know, that this image of an album cover is comprised of these four colors. So they kind of show you the channel, CMYK, and these four colors make everything that you're seeing here. And I know that some of you, you know, that's not a foreign concept too. All right, so other things to be aware of. Art specification. So we've talked about art a lot. Know your specifications. What's the size of whatever it is that you're going to make? What are the size? What is the resolution? Right? Perfect example is you can look at something beautiful online. I know we all have at some point printed something that we saw online, and when you print it, a lot of times it'll look pixelated, right? The reason it looks pixelated because it takes more image for it to look quality when it's printed, when it has, you know, an output on paper than when it's on a screen. So you have to be aware of what resolution you need for that particular job. The other things I actually want to show you what I mean here. So this will be an example of a proof. So let's just say hypothetically we were going to print a flyer, and we're going to make 1,000 flyers for a local show, just an example. So here's a proof that is showing me what this flyer is going to look like. This is a very common tool that you are going to see if you're outputting anything professionally, a proof. The proof is what it looks like, or what it's supposed to look like, before you give the thumbs up and they print those 1,000 pieces. By the way, I think probably the biggest print job that I've ever done is somewhere in the ballpark of 300,000. So imagine that for a moment. Imagine if I'm going to give the thumbs up. I'm printing 300,000 of something and I didn't proof it right. And now I give them the thumbs up and there's a typo. That's problematic. So let me show you some examples of what I'm talking about. So one of the things that I did was I outlined the edges here in yellow just to make a point. That point is that this around here is a bleed. This is a crop mark. That crop mark is telling the printer, remember, this is going to be a physical thing. That crop mark is telling the printer that this is where this gets cut. It like physically gets cut. However, I extended the image and I just highlighted it to show where it is. I extended the image a fraction of an inch. And the reason I did that is because, and by the way, that extension is called a bleed. I'm sure some of you have heard the term bleed. The reason I did that is because this is a physical thing that's going to be cut. And when this is printed, if I'm making 10,000 flyers or 1,000 flyers, they're not cutting one at a time. They're putting it in a machine. And that machine, industrial machine, has a blade. By the way, it's called a guillotine. Sounds pretty gruesome. And the guillotine, the big blade, comes down and it literally will go through like those 1,000 pages. And it's a physical thing we're talking about. So if that page shifts just a little bit, then what happens is the sheet moves somewhere. And if you don't have that bleed, you might end up with an awkward white border. So the reason for the bleed is to make this kind of like a safety net. If it shifts a little bit, you still have it. So again, this is an example of a proof, some basic concepts. We have the crop marks that indicates to the printer that's where it gets cut. We have the bleed that extends a little bit. So just in case it shifts a little bit, we don't have a problem with an awkward white border. And then conversely, if it gets shifted the other way, we always want to be cognizant that anything that's vital. So for example, the word, the, we can't have it too close to the edge, because if it shifts a little bit, if this paper shifts and it gets cut too close to the edge, it literally is going to cut that letter, right? And we can't have that. So that's another common practice, to make sure that anything that's too close to the edge is at least 1/8 of an inch inside. That way, if it gets cut too far in, you're not going to lose it, and it's going to be obvious to anybody that sees it if it is cut. So that's just an example of a proof. It's important, by the way, to always ask for a proof, folks, because as soon as you give a thumbs up, you're going to give confirmation, in an email. You're going to tell them, yeah, print it. And you better believe that once you give them that permission to print, if there's a problem, they will be more than happy to run it again, but you're paying for that. So that's the reason that a proof is important. The other thing I want to mention is that so many times folks will send proofs digitally. Obviously, we know we're in a digital world. I will tell you, I still like physical proofs. The reason I like physical proofs is because if you send me an image on a computer, if my computer monitor is not calibrated properly, or maybe theirs isn't calibrated properly, what I see on my screen might not be what I get when the product is printed. Again, if we're talking about, printing 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, 10,000, 100,000 things, you want it to be right. And trust me, there's no worse feeling, or very few worse feelings than, because I've been there, I'm not going to lie, where you get your first box, UPS shows up, and your place is full of boxes. And you open that first box, you're so excited. You open that first box. And let me tell you something. You were seeing that thing on the screen. You guys all know, I'm sure at some point you're working on your homework. You thought it was perfect. You were like so happy that it was finally done. It was right. You proofread it, et cetera, et cetera. And you finally hit enter. And then the first thing that happens when you get your report back from your teacher is like a glaring omission or typo, right? We've all been there. I've been there. So imagine how much worse it is when you open up that box, the first box of a pallet of 50 boxes, and you open it up and you pull whatever it is that you printed out, and you notice an error. You notice some image is being cut off the artwork. You notice a misspelling. That's painful stuff, folks. I'm telling you, because I've lived it. So that is why a proof is so important. That's why I like to have a physical proof. Even though I know I'm in a digital world, if we're talking about a physical product, I want to at least hold one. Before I give anybody the thumbs up to go ahead and print thousands of something, I want to hold one and make sure it looks right. And I want to show it to as many people as possible to get their feedback, to make sure that I didn't miss anything. That's when I give a thumbs up, because let me tell you something, it is painful if you see that after the fact. By the way, stop me if you have any questions. What you see here is a template. This is not anything fancy. It's basically a template for a CD sleeve. It could be a template for anything. The reason I'm showing it to you is because most companies that you outsource work to, that's what they do. They do whatever it is that you're outsourcing them to do. And more than likely, unless you're reinventing the wheel, they have templates for all the different types of things you might need made. And that really saves you a lot of trouble and potential, complications if you have to hire someone to do your own unique layout for something that's very commonly printed, and then it's off by a fraction of an inch here or there. And then, maybe it doesn't get printed, but maybe it has to come back because there was a mistake. So in this case, you get the proof directly from the people that do it day in and day out, and you shouldn't go wrong there. You give it to your graphic designer and everything's pretty much where it needs to be, and they just put the art in. So proofs are always important, and also templates are important if it's something that you're making that's already been made before. And most of the things that we make, maybe the artwork is unique, but it's not like we're reinventing the wheel when it comes to the actual thing, right? All right. So I mentioned always get a proof, check your proofs, fresh eyes, which means show it to people whose eyes you trust. Manufacturing considerations. This is all stuff you guys are going to be doing. I know some of you already started this. You have an artist you're working with. What kind of products make sense? What are the designs that make sense? What kind of money is this what is it going to cost to get this thing made? How many pieces do you need made? These are all important. If you think about an artist, I'll just come up with an artist that fits, part of this example. There's a group called the Aquabats. Anybody here ever hear of the Aquabats? No? Aquabats is kind of like a surf punk rock group, and they dress up like, everybody know, he's the 1960s Batman. He's like a pop culture icon. He's been on everything. He does a lot of voice. He's no longer with us, but he did a lot of voiceover. Adam West. You guys know Adam West? He was a 1960s, very campy Batman. Anyway, so these guys kind of dress like campy superheroes, these Aquabats. Now, if I'm designing a product for the Aquabats, a group that kind of dresses like superheroes, but they're campy, they're kind of fun. They don't take themselves seriously, is what I'm saying. If I'm developing something for them, then off the top, I might say, you know what would be a really cool product for a superhero group would be action figures. I think action figures would be a perfect product for them. However, then when I dig a little bit further and I have to figure out how to get action figures made, one of the first things I'm going to find out is action figures are made out of plastic. And if I want something made out of plastic and I want to have a competitive price point, more than likely I'm going to outsource it to a company overseas for a lot of different reasons. You're going to find that a lot of times the pricing is going to be more competitive. So now I'm outsourcing it to, let's just say hypothetically, a company in China. And they don't, let's just say that the Aquabats have 5 people in the group. And I want to make 1,000 pieces, right? For each artist, each member of the group. I want to have a set of 5 members, 1,000 pieces. And they're going to have minimums. It's a factory. They're not going to just make 100 pieces. And maybe they can make 1,000 pieces, but the startup cost is so high that financially probably might not even make sense to make 1,000 pieces. Think about what an action figure is. An action figure is, a toy that's comprised of all these different pieces that are put together. So it's not like one solid piece of plastic. If you think about it, it's like they have a head, they have 2 arms, they have a torso, they have the legs, et cetera, et cetera. Some of them, get even more fancy where the arms and the legs have joints that move, right? So you find that all those pieces have to be made. They have to have molds made for those. They have to be assembled, et cetera, et cetera. And when you start looking for quotes, you might find that maybe they have a minimum order of 10,000 pieces. So now think about that for a moment. Now I have 5 members. I was going to make a set of those available as a piece of merchandise. But now, instead of 1,000, which would have been 5,000 because I have 5 members, now I have to make 50,000 of these. Now think about this for a moment. I mentioned the group. Nobody here knew who that group was. It wasn't like I said Kiss. Like if I said Kiss, everybody know what I'm talking about, right? If I said Taylor Swift, everybody know what I'm talking about. If I said BTS, everybody will know who I'm talking about. I said the Aquabats. You don't know who the Aquabats are, which means they're not a household name, which means that they probably don't have 50,000 fans that are going to be clamoring to buy the product. So I very well might find out as I'm going through this process that even though on the surface, action figures for a campy superhero act seems like a great product, it's not practical financially and logistically. So my point is, you have to go for what makes sense. But when I say makes sense, not just on the surface, it makes sense for their brand. Does it make sense financially? That's the other piece that you have to consider as you're going through this process. All right, offset lithography and screen printing. You guys already saw videos earlier in the month for this, so I won't get too deep into any of this stuff. Just a quick, visual here. This is an offset press, CMYK, right? K is black. So that's basically the paper goes through each of these different segments and they print a percentage of each of these colors. And then you end up at the end with a full color job, right? That's the way that these work. Let's move a little bit further. Even with something like that, you have to know a little bit of the nuances of the process. Again, you're outsourcing this, so you got to know some of the basics. There are different types of offset presses. You have sheet-fed presses and web presses. They're both the same process. So in other words, they're both offset lithography, but the actual machine goes about doing that in a different way with the, well, let me rephrase that, uses different type of paper for each of these processes. If I'm using a sheet fed, it looks like what you see here on your left. Literally like your copy machine or your printer at home. You put a stack of paper in it, except these are going to be industrial size sheets. And it pulls one sheet at a time and puts it through the machine, right? The other process, the web press, pulls it off of big rolls like what you see here. Now, you might say to yourself, well, okay, Israel, this is technical. Like, why should I even have to know this? I'm not operating these machines. My answer to you is there's a reason why. And that is, if I'm making, hypothetically, I'm making 1,000 posters for a local band that's going on a Southeast tour, let's just say. And I reach out to Offset Press, and it's a web press. Their numbers are going to be probably significantly higher. Why? Because the startup costs to be able to get the right paper on these massive rolls, to get this job started, the startup cost is significantly higher. On the other hand, with the sheet fed, it's literally, they probably have the paper in stock. And literally, they're just like a copy machine. They're pushing it into the feeder, and then it pulls it in and out. So if I'm making a short run, I'm going to be better off with a sheet fed press versus a web press. Now, if I'm doing a Taylor Swift tour program and I'm going to make hundreds of thousands of them, then in that case, I'm going to be better off using a web press. So very basic things that are important to keep in mind while you're doing your research about manufacturing, okay? So offset lithography is kind of like a modern version of the letterpress. So the letterpress, once upon a time, if you ever saw like an old Western, you know, you would see, I don't know, the guy making the Wanted poster would have this board up, and he would have wooden letters that he would put up on the board, and then he would ink them. By the way, if you remember on the first day class, we talked about leading, right? The leading is the space between the lines. You guys remember that? And the reason it's called leading is because they're lead bars, like physical lead bars that hold those letters together. That's where the original name came from. So the offset press is basically a more modern, automated version of that. By the way, as a side note, it's called offset because unlike the official or the original printing process, where literally that block, that wooden block of a letter would make direct contact with the paper, right? It gets inked and it makes direct contact. With offset press, the original roll that has the image on it, cylinder, does not make direct contact with the paper. Instead, it makes contact with a rubber cylinder, and that rubber cylinder puts that impression on the paper. The reason for that is so you have less wear and tear on the cylinder, the original image, which is going to get you better quality as far as your finished product. So that's why it's off as opposed to directly on it. That's where the offset comes from, in case you're wondering. Paper stock. This is one of those things that I guarantee you, if you're not someone that's done this before, if someone doesn't tell you, you probably would never think about it. You go somewhere, I want to make a tour booklet for my band. We're going to try to sell them on the road, and we need 1,000 of these. And they tell you, okay, great, you need 1,000 tour poster, 1,000 tour books. Let's see here, how many pages? Oh, it's only 8 pages. Okay, so 8 pages, that's cool. We can make those for $2,000. You do the math. Oh, okay, I'm gonna make 1,000 of them. I'm gonna sell them for $10 a piece. That's $10,000. So I have a profit there. Okay, now here's the problem. The problem is, what kind of paper is it? Paper isn't just paper. Sounds like a crazy thing to say, but paper isn't just paper. For example, everyone in this room, I'm sure, this virtual room, I'm sure at some point you guys have held a newspaper, right? And what happens when a little drop of water falls on newsprint? It's done, right? It pretty much disintegrates. Now, what happens if you just got your tour book made in newsprint? That's a bad look, right? Now, if everyone here, I'm sure, has held a magazine at some point, if you drop a little bit of water in a magazine, it might mess up the paper, but it's not going to like demolish it the way that it would newsprint. Newsprint is like almost disintegrates, right? And everyone here clearly has held a book. And if you drop a little bit of water on a page from a book, as you guys know, usually it's a thicker page. You know, if I took a newspaper and I just flipped through it, like I might rip it easily. If I flip through a magazine, maybe I'll, depending on how quickly I'm turning, maybe I'll rip it. But I could flip through a book like this and it's not going to rip because usually the pages are thicker, right? So my point in saying that is that paper isn't just paper. There's different types of paper stock. And that's something you have to be aware of, these little nuances when you're going and doing research about your product. You have to make sure that you understand all of the different elements to get that product made. Now we have coated versus uncoated. So that means, you know, we have the print, but then is there any kind of sheen on the actual, you know, paper? So I have an example here to kind of, and hopefully it'll translate. I think it will. Hopefully it'll translate. I'm going to go through two different examples. So this is a really famous record by Stevie Wonder, Inner Visions, and I'm going to kind of go like this, just to kind of show you that you're really not seeing any kind of sheen on it. This is a flat, obviously you can't feel it, but it's very flat. It's a very flat finish. Feels very earthy, which I think is what they were going for this record. On the other hand, I have this Ray Charles record, and I want to show you the difference. This is a high gloss. Watch what happens when I put it in front of the camera. Look at that. Like you could actually see almost a reflection of my computer and the camera on here, right? So that sheen, I mean, for me personally, like I can see my reflection in here when I hold it in front of myself. Doesn't seem like a big deal, but this is a small aesthetic that's going to make a difference maybe to your consumer. You know, not only how it feels, how it looks, right? So if you were releasing, if you had a fashion, think about it like this. You were doing a fashion, and by the way, Taylor Swift has done this for her last 2 albums. She released books for her albums. Like her albums had multiple versions of books. If we had a Taylor Swift book that was like really cheap paper, I mean, people online would be like, oh, did you get that book? It ripped real quick. It was, you know, felt cheap, et cetera, et cetera. On the other hand, it probably was nice and glossy and thick and durable and felt substantial. So again, something as basic as paper, something as basic as ink is important when you're developing your product. So here's some examples of when I said 4-color separation and maybe the job that you may or may not be printing. So I'm going to just show you 2 examples. Here we have the iconic Beatles Revolver album. And if you could see this record, I'm sure some of you have seen it before, it's black and white, right? But black is a color. CMYK. K is for black. White is not a color. White is the absence of color. There is no white color that they put on this. All right? The actual stock paper was white, and they printed black. So this is a 1-color job. This is a 1-color job. Why is that important? It's important because when you're buying, when you're paying for a print job, you're going to pay based on a lot of things, including how much ink do you use. This is, and how much setup for that ink. This only has 1 color. By the way, unlike a poster, if I have a poster, by the way, full color, a poster might be 4 full color, all color, full color, 4 color over, right, has a backside, full color. A flyer, a poster, is going to be full color over full color, 4 over 4, which you see right here on the screen. This is 1 full color one color over 0, because this is one sheet of paper that's folded and then glued. So the inside of this is white. There's no print on here. This is a record. There's no print on there. So my point is that this is if you were printing this, this will be a one color over 0, because it's scored, folded, and glued job, one color job. Versus if this were a flyer, this would be a 4-color job. The point in saying that is that it's going to be more money because you have more color, more effort, and more film, et cetera, et cetera. By the way, feel free to stop me if you have any questions at all. Other things like enhancements, I think are important to think about for a moment. So I'm gonna pull something over here. If you're not familiar with, and this is something you see in all kinds of releases, this just happens to be a classic one. This is Physical Graffiti by Led Zeppelin. And one thing you're gonna notice is that it has die cuts, right? So that extra step of cutting this, right? Cutting these little windows out. And then you have these little seams that fit in there. These are 2 records, by the way. That's also a feature that you could use to enhance paper. You know, if you just say paper's paper, don't worry about it. Whatever you guys want to do, paper's paper. Something like that can make all the difference. This is one of the most iconic records and also jackets in music. So that's something to keep in mind. The first record I showed you, it's hard to see, but it's embossed. So what embossed means, I know some of you know what that means, is that the paper is kind of raised. The paper is kind of raised, you could feel it. So that also might be something that you might pay extra money for, because it's going to enhance, you know, the actual tactile experience of the product. Debossing is when it goes in as opposed to out. Other things you might see are scented inks. Anybody ever see like a scratch and sniff paper? Yes? No? Yeah. So they've been releases, believe it or not. I remember Katy Perry did that years ago with, I forget the name of the release, but it had like a bubblegum scent. So the cassette, the paper on the CD actually had a scent on it. You could smell it, right? So things that you could do to enhance, their enhancements or embellishments that you could add to paper, something that seems so basic to make your product better, right? Replication versus duplication. So replication is actually manufacturing. So a commercial release that you buy in a store, you buy online, is going to be replicated. Like they actually, this is manufactured. So when you saw the process of manufacturing a CD, this is actually made from scratch. Like they actually pour the plastic into a mold and all that kind of stuff. And then duplication is what you might do with a CD burner. So you basically have a blank CD, right? And you put it in a burner, right? Back in the day, you could put it in your Macs. You can't do that anymore. But they have burners. They actually have a 8-tier burner. And then you put all the blanks in. It has the music in the memory. You hit a button, and then they just duplicate it, right? And then you have machines, obviously, that could print on that as well. But this is a duplication. Now, the reason I'm even showing this is because there's a place for all of these. If I was going to sell this hypothetically on my website, on my Bandcamp page, you know, it would be acceptable for me to sell, this is actually what that is, to sell a duplicated release. But if I was going to try to deal with a commercial retailer, then it's probably a no-no, because they want a commercially replicated product to make available, not a burned CD. If I was a small band that I was performing live, it would be okay for me to sell duplicated CDs. However, if I was going to make my product available, I don't know, on Amazon, I probably would want to have it replicated, right? So just some small things to keep in mind. There's still a place for both of them, okay? All right, so let's talk a little bit about manufacturing. This is part of your assignment, by the way, not to make discs. I'm talking about discs because they're common, but to make whatever it is that you want to make. So for example, I want to make 500 CDs. I could do my research and find that, okay, 500 CDs, this company is going to charge me $1 per CD. This company is going to charge me $2.44 per CD. I'm going to go with the $1 per CD company off the top. Mistake, because I haven't looked further. So what do I want to look at? What am I getting? Is it duplicated? Is it replicated? Again, I just told you there's a place and a purpose for each of those. 2, what am I getting in the product? So is the product, just a one-page insert, right? Just one, like a card, that's it, right? With a slimline jewel case, nothing on the back. I take this out, nothing on the inside, right? Or in this case, maybe not. Maybe in this case, it's a lot more than that. We have replication as opposed to duplication. We have full color on the disc. The insert is not just one card, it's actually a big fold out, multi-panel, right? The tray card has an image too, front and back, right? Again, these small little things might make a difference, between you being able to sell a product and not sell a product. If it's something, and I'm not picking on any group, but if it's something like this, which is just a sleeve, you guys have all seen these before, just a sleeve, I might say, this doesn't feel collectible. But if it's something like Tool's 10,000 Days CD, this has these little goggles in it. I don't know how well it'll show on this camera, but it has like an optical illusion if you look through it. And it's multiple pages, it's hard. You can tell it has these glasses in it. And then on top of that, obviously has a disc. So something like that, is clearly might be the difference between somebody buying something and not buying something, right? Obviously, this is going to cost more, but it literally still might make the difference between someone buying it and not buying it at the same time. If something like this was available for sale, the most I'm going to get for this is maybe $8. Something like this is for sale, I might be able to sell it for 25, 30 bucks, right? Even though it costs more to manufacture. So that's the other thing you want to keep in mind. Just don't look at a price. What am I getting? In this case, we have a digipack. A digipack is, this plastic. I'm sure you've all seen these, where this kind of like just clicks into it, and it's a solid, cardboard sleeve. Then you have things like this, which is these are called O cards because they fit like an O over the actual product. It's just cardboard, but it makes it look a little bit more significant, right? The art's bigger. Little things like this, these are little embellishments that might make the difference between someone buying the product or not buying the product. I got this recently from a band, and I thought it was kind of cool. It was a cassette, which we've all seen, right? But what was cool about it that I hadn't seen before was the full printing on the actual cassette. Usually the cassette has like a little bit of print, but if you can see here, the print is all over the actual cassette, right? And that might make the difference between someone buying it and not buying it. This one's kind of cool. This is a CD. And on the flip side is a functional record. I can put this on a turntable and play it. One side is a CD, so I can have a full-length album. And on the flip side is the single off the album. Somebody might buy this just because of that extra feature, right? But you best believe this is going to cost you a lot more than if we just had a regular, old-fashioned, if you will, CD. So these are things to consider, okay? Screen printing, you guys already saw a video the first week of class about screen printing, so I'm not going to dig too deep into that. I'm just going to tell you, obviously, you can use screen printing to print all kinds of stuff. What I do want to say is that when you look at the pricing, again, just like everything else, you want to dig a little bit deeper. I could look at one company that says, here's my Full Sail t-shirt. T-shirts are $2. And I could go to somewhere else and it says t-shirts are $5. And you might say, well, once again, go to the $2 company. But when you dig deeper, you might find, that one is a, low-end Hanes shirt, and then the other one maybe is a higher-end, 100% cotton American Apparel shirt. I'm just throwing those names out. The other thing is color, right? If I have a t-shirt and this company's telling me $2, this company's telling me $5, how many colors am I getting with this company versus this company? Maybe this company, we talked about 4-color separation. Maybe this company is only 1 color. And maybe this company has a full color job. So those are things you want to pay attention to before you're swayed, to go one way or the other. You really have to do that research, okay? So these are just things I want you to be aware of as you work on that project. Again, your job is to do research on 2 manufacturers or printers for your product. Again, your product should be more than just a CD. We looked at examples, or a vinyl record. It should be more than that. And you want to make sure that you look at things like the turnaround time. Where is the product getting made? If I'm making product in China versus, let's just say, I don't know, Georgia, I'm going to probably pay a lot less to get it from Georgia. I'm probably going to get it a lot faster if it's coming from Georgia. Turnaround time. Don't just stick on the price. Materials. What materials is this one versus this one? Right? These are all things that you want to dig into. At the same time, if you remember the other day, you did research about retail. So the other component of this assignment is for you to spend some time searching retailers that make sense for this product, both in the physical space and in the online space. Okay? All right. Any questions